Hello, my name is Julia Williamson, and I would like to begin today by asking all of you to please dig deep into your memories way back to when you got your very first job. You were probably in high school, and more than likely it wasn't a glamorous or a high-paying job, but try to remember that first week of experience. You may have prepared food, or bagged groceries, or cleaned restrooms, and you probably felt like you learned a lot and worked hard for that money that you were about to earn. You likely had something that you wanted to buy with that first paycheck, and earning your own money was enabling you to accomplish that, and probably giving you a little taste of freedom and independence. Um, but when payday came, you were probably a little, or maybe even really, disappointed in how little you made. I entered the workforce in 2004 when I was 16, and I worked approximately 20 hours a week at a fast food restaurant, making minimum wage, $5.15 an hour. And for all the work I did in that week, my check, that very first paycheck, did not even scratch $100 after taxes were taken out. And I just remember being so disappointed, and I quickly realized that it was going to take another couple of weeks to be able to afford some of the things that I had hoped to get with that first check. So minimum wage in the United States has been a hotly debated subject for the past few years, but today I just want to speak about the history of minimum wage and give you a few main points and facts to consider. My first objective is to give you a brief history of minimum wage. And as I began my research, I learned through the U.S. Department of Labor's website that it was Franklin D. Roosevelt that signed minimum wage back into law on June 25th, 1938, under a brand new law called the Fair Labor Standards Act. This new act affected an estimated 20% of the workforce at the time that it was instated, and with the establishment of this act also came the first time that employers were legally required to pay workers overtime for certain kinds of jobs. So this was a pretty monumental, new big thing back then. The original minimum wage at that time was set to 25 cents an hour, and it did increase every few years, pretty consistently thereafter. So, just as a side note, 25 cents an hour in 1938 is the equivalent to about $4.50 in today's money. But when you adjust that for inflation, 25 cents an hour probably felt like much more back then than $4.50 feels to us now. These estimates came from the Pew Research Center, pewresearch.org, and they kind of break down all the different dollar amounts and what they were, dollar amounts in the 30s compared to what they're worth today. So the next point I want to discuss is the relationship between inflation and minimum wage. Even though minimum wage is the highest now that it's ever been, workers are not benefiting from the higher dollar amount like they did decades ago. When the US dollar was at its most valuable in 1968, minimum wage was only $1.60. Those numbers come straight from the Department of Labor website, and that might not seem like a lot to us now, but at that time, $1.60 an hour was equal to making over $10 an hour in today's money. So you can see how during that time, it would have been much easier for a working mother or father, or both, to support a family on that kind of an income. Unfortunately, $10 in 2016 doesn't seem to stretch nearly as far as it did in the late 60s because our dollar is worth less. The last topic that I wanted to address concerning minimum wage is what it meant for workers of both yesterday and today. In 1968, the average price of rent was only $130 a month, which meant that at a minimum wage level, you would easily be able to make that payment each month on that income alone. Compare that to today's national average of just over $1,000 a month for rent, and today's minimum wage of $7.25 is not sufficient to cover that cost. Some states, 29 to be exact, have implemented their own state minimum wage amounts, which are higher than the national minimum wage. But even with these increases over the average, workers are still rallying for more. But the road has not been easy for Americans that wish to be paid more for entry-level work, and it's been a very divided issue in both the public and Washington. According to news sources such as the New York Times, a proposal to raise minimum wage up to $15 an hour in some of the larger cities, such as San Francisco and Seattle, could be taking effect within the next 2 to 5 years. So, we've talked about the history of minimum wage, starting with its creation in 1938. We've talked about the correlation between minimum wage and the inflation of the dollar. And lastly, today we talked about how the current minimum wage amount is affecting everyday workers. And it's my hope that this speech has been educational and insightful, and that it's maybe inspired you to do a little bit of research on your own so that you are more knowledgeable. Thanks for your time. Bye.